Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Caitlin Little, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Officer for CCOVI. Welcome to the very last of the 2016 CCOVI Lecture Series. Today, we are very pleased to welcome CCOVI Fellow Ronald Jackson, who is a renowned author and wine writer. Ron obtained his PhD from the University of Toronto, where he specialized in the physiology of botrytis. And it was during, however, one of his sabbaticals at Cornell University that he expanded his interest in all things relative to enology and viticulture. While he was a professor and chair of the botany department at Brandon University, he became a technical advisor to the Manitoba Liquor Control Commission. However, he's probably best known for his best-selling textbooks. He is the author of Wine Science, Principles and Application, Wine Tasting, a Professional Handbook, and Conserve Water, Drink Wine. And he has a third edition of Wine Tasting being released soon. Last fall, the International Organization of Vine and Wine presented Ron with their award for the Best Encyclopedia Wine Text of 2015 for the fourth edition of Wine Science, which he got to accept last fall in Paris. And today he's going to be speaking to us about oak characteristics relative to barrel production. So please join me in welcoming Ron.
Thank you very much. And we'll get moving. And let's see. Okay. It would be very nice to say a lot about the origin of barrels, but we can't, because there basically is almost no information. There's a little bit where some ancient authors mention things that have been translated as being barrel, but that's pretty iffy. The first real, clear, written description of barrel making actually comes from Pliny the Elder, around 70 AD. The first clear visual representation of an oak barrel is from Trajan's column, of which we're here. This is an illustration of the top of the column showing some of the barrels. This is a Roman barrel from England. And you'll notice that the shape is somewhat elongated, the same as the one on the Trajan column. And here's one from the Bayeux Tapestry, famous for England, when France took over England. Again, there's a tapestry, so can we really be sure they did a precise structure of the barrel? But at least it looks like some of the Roman ones. But then you have also, there's a funerary sculpture from Germany. And even though the picture is not on the angle, you can pretty much get an idea that probably the barrel shape is what we would normally think of as a barrel shape today. And then from the Rhone Valley, the late 1400s, clearly a barrel that really looks pretty much normal. So that's about all one can really say about barrels, at least history. The advantages of barrels. Barrels essentially came in around the 1st century in the Roman era. Before that, wine was stored and made in amphoras or larger versions, but all ceramic. Certainly far easier to roll a barrel than to try and carry an amphora. There are big things about this high. They're heavy if you have that full of wine. Well, one potential advantage, now whether they did that in the Roman era is not certain, but some barrels have been found with numbers on the stage, suggesting that they were actually taken apart, numbered so that they could be reassembled. And so the possibility is that they could actually ship the wine, take the barrel apart, ship the barrel back, and reuse it. That this was not done with amphoras. Certainly stronger support, certainly because you have the double arch, and of course it's made from strong wood. The disadvantages of oak and barrels, certainly more complex to make. You have problems of leakage potential, some oxidation, amphoras. If they had the vitreous line, now not all amphoras were vitreously lined, but somewhere. So actually you had very high heat and actually formed a thin layer of glass on the inside of the amphora. So it was not porous, and of course you could age the wine. Microbial contamination, okay, that's for sure. Amphoras were not reused, or if they were reused, they weren't reused for wine. And initially, many types of wood were used. Fir, pine, obviously not very good as far if you're going to store wine any period of time. Okay. The type of oak species, basically 3 main oak species. You have Quercus sessilis, Quercus robur, and Quercus alba. Normally, people talk about French oak, but French oak is just European oak. It's just the location from which the wood is derived, and it goes actually even to Sweden and Norway, all through England. This is the preferred oak for a European oak if you're going to age and store wine. Robur is the one that tends to be preferred if you're going to age cognac or Armagnac. And then we have the Quercus alba, the main white oak species from North America. There are many other white oaks in North America, but Quercus alba is about somewhere between 45 to 50% of what will be cut and used for barrels. And characteristics of these species, just a few points. Quercus sessilis has more oak lactones, a nice flavorant. Eugeniol has vanillin. Quercus robur has less of these, but it has more alagitannins. Well, one of the advantages of toasting a barrel is to reduce the extractability of alagitannins. And Quercus alba, pretty much the same as Quercus sessilis as far as the basic flavorants that you would find in the oak. Quercus sessilis, fine grain. Quercus alba, fine grain. Quercus robur tends to be more coarse grain. One of the disadvantages of European oak, in the sense, is that they have larger vessels. I'll be showing this slide of that. Very large vessels and thinner tyloses, the structures that actually block those large vessels. Quercus robur, basically the same. One of the potential advantages of Quercus alba, the American oak, is that the vessels are slightly smaller and their tyloses are thicker, so less porous. Many of these features do vary considerably based on growth conditions, location in the trunk, all sorts of factors, but when the trees are cut and the staves are made, then no one keeps all the staves from one particular bolt of oak separate. It's all mixed up. And so many of these variations that you get based on growth conditions and location of the trunk tend to be just blended out. And okay, we had 2 different stories here. This is a study with a Spanish oak. You don't hear about it very much. French oak and American. And we had, I just took two, they're actually from the paper, there were 4 different red wines. And when you start to look at the difference between these, this is sensory evaluation material. So you see some slightly differences in woody, but many of these characteristics are basically the same. And the differences you find, this represents it a bit, but the paper actually had more. The differences based is more on the type of wine that was in the barrel than from the barrel itself. So this kind of suggests that all this material about different oaks and so on may not be as a major feature as it is played out to be. But then when you look at the chemistry, so here we have sensory, here we have chemistry, here we have a kind of different story. The aromatics in the black, and this is Central Forest in France. This is the Vosges, this is Bertrange. All these 3 are largely sessilous, with some Roubourg. There's never a real full split. And here's Limousin, and Limousin tends to have more Roubourg than sessilous. So this would kind of suggest that based on the various forests in France, you have a lot of variation in aromatic character from one location to another. But as far as the total phenolics, pretty much the same. And here we have from Limousin, as general studies would suggest, that you have more alagi tannins. And as I mentioned, this type tends to be used for brandy. Primacy of oak. Well, why do people use oak? Well, here's a representation of one of the reasons. The trees grow tall and straight. They don't have many side branches. Ideal. Straight green. That means that the vessels run straight up. In many trees, if you take hickory, it spirals, zigzags its way up the tree. If you look at lilac, and you look at lilac and you just look at the bark, you'll see that the vessels are actually spiraling up the tree. If you want to split a log, you don't want it spiraling. You don't want it zigzagging. So very good in the sense that, let's see, great strength, flexibility, resilience. There are a lot of rays in oak which are great for resilience. Generally free from structural faults. Classic one or not. You don't want a tree that you're going to make a barrel of that's going to have a big knot in it. No value. Free of pronounced and undesirable odors. Well, normally we think, well, we're using oak to get flavor. Yeah, we do, but we don't want too much. And oak, even though is kind of a mild smelling wood in comparison to many others. Think of pine, or spruce. They have large rays. We'll be showing a picture of that. About 30% of the wood array. There's a real advantage to having lots of rays. I'll mention that. There certainly limits the flow of wine out through the stave. You want the wine to stay inside the barrel. You don't want flowing through the stave or down the stave. And it also helps to limit the rate at which oxygen gets through large vessels. But huge vessels are potentially negative. If you take, for example, red oak, their vessels do not get blood. And so if you took a long piece of red oak, kind of a tube of red oak, you could actually blow in one end, put the other end in some water, and you would have bubbles coming up. You certainly don't want that in your barrel. So these get plugged. Production of staves. Okay, we chop down the tree, cut it into bolts. In France and most of Europe, they will then split it into quarters, and then those quarters are split again. And the staves are cut out in a kind of wasteful way as far as wood, so that the stave is the longest along the radius. So these are all cut out on the radius. Then they're laid out, and in Europe, they are normally seasoned for 3 years. And I'll leave this out. I'll talk about it later. Wood structure. This is Quercus alba from the States. I know why in the electron micrograph it doesn't show the tyloses. That's kind of sad, but at least here we see all these tyloses, which are ingrowth from the parenchyma cells that surround the vessels. And here we have these humongous vessels that you can actually see with the naked eye. And they get filled. This is another radial section through white oak. You can see here these huge vessels with all these tyloses and rays going across. And this one actually is red oak, but I put it in because it shows this very huge multi-seriate ray. So essentially the wine would be trying, if it were going through the safe, it'd be going through this direction, that side. And of course, it runs into all these rays which block the flow. And that is one of the features that you definitely want. Here's another diagrammatic representation. Sadly, it's of beech, not of oak. I couldn't find one of oak. But again, you see all these rays that would be blocking the flow of wine across the stave. And because each stave is abutted to one another, where the rays from one stave end will probably not line up with the rays of another. So essentially, if the wine goes into a stave, basically it can move along the stave, but then it's stopped. And the tyloses prevent any wine from getting in. If it gets into the stave, it can't flow down and drip out the end of the barrel. Splitting, again, illustrated. The only part of the wood you actually use is the heartwood because it's dead. The tyloses go in, and this is the part of the wood that you want. This is an example of how it would be cut in the United States, where they tend not to split. They saw, and so they just saw. So some of them are right on the radius, others are not. But in fact, probably doesn't make a heck of a lot of difference. An example of the type of device that they use to split the log. And here's an example from Séguin-Moreau in France, where they have the staves out seasoning for 3 years. They actually have pipes, and you can see the water being sprayed. They don't want the wood to dry too fast. And so if they detect the wood is drying too fast and tend to warp, then they simply spray with water to slow the rate at which the wood dries, and the water or the rain actually leaches out compounds that they prefer not to have in the oak. So this is for 3 years, And again, you can see some strapping around. The wood does tend to warp a bit, and so often they use the strapping just to minimize so that when the wood finally sets, it tends not to warp. Natural seasoning, basically 3 years, essentially 1 year per centimeter. It's outside for the 3 years. In the States, the tendency is to kiln drying, but before they actually kiln dry the stave down to about 12% moisture content, they do allow natural drying, but the finishing is in a kiln that is heated to 45 to 60 degrees until they get it down to the desired 12%. What are some of the differences? I consider to be more pleasant, woody, vanilla character. I'm not so sure I believe this, but anyway, that's what they say. I tend to like American oak a lot. They say more aggressive green, resinous. Well, maybe I like green resinous, I don't know. But then I'm not really sure I even believe that either, because I tend to like, or I used to be really super crazy about Spanish wines. And I knew they normally age their wines in American oak, and so I thought, well, probably I like the Spanish wine because it's in American oak, but I'm not so sure I even believe that anymore. And natural seasoning, one of the advantages, reduces the amount of ellagic tannin content due to its polymerization. Here you have fewer volatile constituents, they say. Flavors pyrolytic breakdown during toasting, maybe so. Doesn't really apply because they may not, with American oak, actually do toasting. They may or may not, but at least this favoring outside for 3 years certainly not going to apply to the kiln dried. In the oak that's outside, there is some fungal decay. Coriolis does some decay, and presumably that helps to break down some compounds. That this will not apply to the American oak if they kiln dry. There is some lost leaching of bitter esculin from the oak. If you have it outside for 3 years, again, this will not apply if you use kiln drying. Preparation of the staves goes through a series of processes. One's called listing, where you trim off the edges because the barrel, the stave actually has to curve, and of course it's be tighter at the bottom than in the middle. So the staves initially are straight, so we have to trim this off so they can get that curve. And then they do a little bit of backing, and then they hollow out this picture really I don't particularly like, but anyway, it seems to imply they actually take a lot out from the center. It's just a thin amount. It just helps for the bending of the wood when they make the barrel. And then they're jointing. This shaves off a little bit on an angle, because again, the staves have to fit or curve, and so you have to have a little bit thinner on the inside than the outside. So the selection, any one stave is not the same thickness, so they're variable. So you actually lay it out, and you take a bunch of staves, start laying them out, and then when you get near the end, you have to select the ones that actually make the appropriate length. So they actually lay them out, set it out, then these are the ones that are going to be this barrel, these ones, and so on. And then we start to set them up. And this is basically an illustration of what you do. The first part is you actually heat and steam the inside of the wood to soften it. And once the wood is softened a bit, a windlass kind of pulls the bottom in. And heating, various types. These are just two examples. One is a brazier, which has oak chips usually, and to produce the heat, you can either have a top on top or not, all sorts of variations. Other places use gas, and probably if you're making a bourbon barrel, probably you'd use this one because you actually want to carbonate the inner surfaces of the barrel. Certainly don't want that for wine or cognac. And just some photographs of this one. Basically has finished its toasting. The new one is coming in, the brazier with the flame. Just a few other pictures here they're putting on, pulling it in. Essentially, for the toasting, you actually have the barrel in full shape. Yeah, you have hoops in the top and the bottom. And then you actually have the heat and flame with inside. They actually spray water periodically inside so it gets some steam. They don't want the temperature to get too high. And this is a picture taken on the inside of the barrel with this is kind of medium toast. Here are examples of light toast and medium toast and kind of heavier toast over here. The effects of toasting. Occasionally people will want no toast. This is normally not the case for wine, but it will always go through this period to start with, which is the heating and steaming, so that you can get the barrel soft, the wood soft enough so that you can squeeze it in and get it into its normal shape. Toasting, light toasting, essentially that's about 5 minutes, plus or minus a bit. Surface reaches about 100, 150 degrees centigrade. Wood retains most of its oaky and coconut flavors. Oak lactones are described as being coconutty. And since everybody says so, I say so. I've never smelled it, but there we go. Medium toast, this is kind of preferred toasting for most producers. It essentially means about 15 minutes of toasting. Surface reaches is a little bit above 150 degrees C. It generates phenolic aldehydes, which we can just crudely consider to be vanilla-like, plus also some vanillin. It also generates furanilic aldehydes. We can just roughly categorize those as more or less caramel-type flavors. Reduces the solubility of oak allantoins and begins the degradation of oak lactones at the innermost surface of the barrel. Medium to heavy toast, you're up to about 25 minutes of this exposure to flame and moisture. Goes over 200 degrees centigrade. Starts to degrade the vanillin, caramel, coconut, oak flavors, but that's only on the innermost surface. As soon as you go further back into the stave, of course, it's only starting to heat up. And so you have a series of flavorings. The longer you toast, the more flavors you have. It's just that what you have on the surface is one series. A little bit in, you have another series, and further on, further you go in, the more it's like basic oak. So it does degrade, but you're going to produce those further in. Generates, well, same thing. Further limits allantoins and produces some smoky, spicy flavors, eugeniol and so on. Here's a nice representation of some of these things in a graphical manner. Oak lactones goes down. This is at the beginning. This is light, medium, medium full, and full or heavy toast. Tannins, extractable tannins, going down. When we look at our Furinellic, the caramel ones, it's going up, and you get a peak somewhere between medium and medium heavy toast. The vanillin production kind of peaks again around medium, and then we get some of these volatile phenols produced increasingly the longer you heat, and then they have kind of some waxy phenolic characters. And most people tend to prefer the toasting level on this range, in which case you still get your oak lactone, get some tannin, you get your these furanels, you get the vanillins, and you don't get too many these volatile phenols. Getting to the barrelhead, it's the heads of the barrel are never toasted, so it's always straight oak. It's only the inside of the central part of the barrel that ever gets toasted. Heads never are. They lay those out. They make holes for doweling, and then they put a reed between. Now, this could be a rush, it could be iris, various things they put in. And so this holds the thing together. Then they cut it out in a circle. They trim off edges, and the barrel itself goes through some treatment. You shave off a portion here, and then you have the crows in here, and some angle cuts for this to actually fit in. So it fits in there, and your finished barrel. So here we have our heads. Here we have the cut. You can see some segments that are hanging out. This is the rush between each of those heading pieces. Picture of the look of the barrel after it's. They have a machine that does that whole thing, and pretty heavy toast on this barrel. Putting the head in, you can either take the hoops off or just loosen them somewhat, and they have this special device which allows it to get down in. It's kind of bent over, and so they pull it up and get it into this cruise area, and then they put in the hoops and seal it in. This is another presentation. I say presentation. Some producers simply want barrels that have a certain look. That's kind of the old look of a barrel. You have some supports across. Apparently this is not necessary, but it's part of the old look. So if you want the old look, that they will put it in for you. And if you want even more old look, then you'll take some chestnut branches, about that size, split them, and then wrap them around. Again, it's another presentation thing. It depends on what the producer, the people who are buying it. If they want that, okay. You want it, you pay for it, we'll do it. And alternatives, oak tanks are coming back in slowly. I like oak tanks, especially for certain wines that you don't want too much oak character, but you do want to have a bit of that oxidation aspect. This is the kind of standard version. This is your updated modern version, which has an opening that you can actually get in more easily to clean the inner surface of the barrel. The other type, you have to take the top off and do it from the top down, or somebody has to get in there and do it this way. This is more modern. If you want to see what's going on during the fermentation, well, you just have a look. They have one of the staves they actually take out and they put in a strip of fiberglass so you can actually look inside. The top is quite sophisticated. You can have cooling coils that go down into your wine so you can regulate the temperature. And you can also have a system that creates turbulence if you specifically want that. Another alternative, here's your stainless steel tank, and you have these oak battens that are just hanging on the inside. So you can get the oak, but certainly prevent any oxidation. You can do the same thing in barrels, depending on what you want. Obviously, this has been used before, and the amount of extract you get out of a used barrel is quite a bit less. So if you don't want to use a new barrel, just put in some lining of oak. Here you can use dowels if you want even less. Oak chips are an alternative, and another new innovation. The staves actually have cuts in the stave to increase the surface area. So various options. Alternatives, okay. I was talking about adding shavings. You could actually use powder. If you're going to use powder, you have to have it in a special bag. Otherwise, it just floats, and it's a horrible situation, of course. Causes a lot of problem when you want to find your wine. But the new barrel is the white squares. And you see that the used barrel is that one. But other than that, it seems as though in this particular instance, the addition of shavings or powder or cubes really didn't do a lot relative to the sensory difference of the wine. It was the new barrel that had the major difference. And if we look at, this is in a tank, this is barrel, again, in a tank, when you add these various components, almost nothing. So it really seems to suggest that some of these, quote, alternatives are not really doing a great deal. Well, at least not with this experiment. Now, what does have an influence? Okay, volume seems to have a significant. Here's the 220 liter barrel, the 500, and the 1,000. And you can see that as far as oak lactones, certainly using the smaller barrel has a big difference. Eventually, there's a difference between the 500 and the 1,000, but it takes a longer period for it starts to show. Well, one of the interesting things in this graphic is that even though the dashed line is the wine being taken out of the barrel and put in bottle, and we see that the oak lactones are actually still going up, which is kind of intriguing. Is this oak lactones that have been associated with some glycoside, and they're breaking down, and that's, I really have to go back to the paper to see if they actually talk about this. You don't see the same phenomenon as far as vanillin, though. Yeah, here we have the vanillin. The difference between the 220 and the 500 is much less as far as vanillin than the oak lactone. But once the wine's in the bottle, the amount of vanillin basically either goes down slightly or is almost the same. Another variation is barrel reuse. This does make a difference. Here we have first French, first American. What did I do? Where were I? Oh, there we are. Okay. Major difference in total phenolics. As far as non-flavonoid phenolics, basically the lactams, pretty much the same sort of thing, but okay, there are some differences. When we go to the first refill, we see the difference between the French and the American, much less. And when we get to the second refill, very minor differences. As far as the non-flavonoids, the differences are a little more evident when you go to the first refill. By the time of the second refill, basically the differences between the American and the French in this experiment were gone. And some sensory differences. French oak and American oak, doesn't look as though we have a lot of difference. Not on this experiment, just a little bit more woody in the case of the American oak. But the other two are all American oak, and we see some significant differences here. There's 220 and what one is that? The 1,000-liter container. Major differences in the characteristics, especially as far as woody, vanilla, body, and so on. Another major difference, again, this reflects on the refill issue. The major difference, if you use it a second time, much less effect. And another important feature relative to oak barrels is gas exchange. There is an exchange. This depends partially on the wood origin and structure, the size of the vessels, the type of tyloses that are found, the number of fibers, and if there are any micro fissures that form during toasting. The amount of ullage, big factor. Most of the exchange in gas is in the ullage area above the wine and in the head piece. So you have your barrel, and most of the exchange is going to be right in along the head associated with the ullage. Number of repeats makes a big difference. It increases the rate of gas exchange. Humidity and alcohol content of the cellar will influence the relative rates of water to alcohol escape. And here we're talking mostly about what's escaping, not what's getting in. Okay, there is some oxygen getting in, but most of what is actually occurring is escape of material from the barrel. The tightness of the seal. There are two basic routes by which material can flow through the stave. One is as a gas, water vapor or alcohol in the vapor phase through the pores of the wood. And of course, then there's potential for mass flow. If you remember the structure of your cell wall, all that cellulose in there, it can actually, water and alcohol can actually flow between the cellulose fibers and slowly weave its way out. But normally what happens inside the barrel, once it's plugged, is that it goes under negative pressure. These are a series of examples. This one obviously is not doing very well because it's not under negative pressure at all. This was going fine, and then whoop, something happened here. Well, whatever, and back up. But normally you're getting into negative pressure inside that barrel. This is the types of gases that we have. Sadly, the experimenter didn't extend it for a longer period. This is the oxygen concentration inside a sealed barrel under two conditions. Forget about that for the moment. It's more important over here. It stays up surprisingly high, kind of 7% oxygen concentration. Seems kind of strange, but when they left it longer, okay, it goes down to 1.8, which is something more what you tend to expect. This one is the carbon dioxide concentration. They had two wines. This wine was wine that had been in the barrel and had gone through malolactic fermentation inside the barrel. It has a lot more carbon dioxide. This is basically the same wine, had gone through malolactic fermentation, but then was transferred to the barrel. In the process of the transfer, you will have the accentuation of carbon dioxide out of the young wine, and so you have less carbon dioxide. And eventually it goes up after several months to about 28% carbon dioxide in the ullage gas, and the oxygen down to 1.8, and presumably eventually even less. And how am I doing? Ooh, almost right on. Summary of sources of variation in oak and so on. Oak species, fine, coarse grain, tyloses, chemistry, raised, so on. Geographic origin, yes, true. Location in the trunk, yes, true. Chemistry, method of drying, definitely. But some of these features are actually going to be blended out because of the way the barrel, you just take a stave here and so on. And then, of course, what do you do? Do you take your wine from a single barrel and put it directly in the bottle? Normally, you blend. So another aspect of blending out differences. Level of toasting. Okay, yeah, well, that's pretty sure. Nature of the barrel, conditioning prior to use. This is of special concern if you're going to actually ferment in the barrel. Size of cooperage definitely adds a big duration. How long you actually leave it in the barrel, clearly a serious factor. Cellar conditions, yes, especially the longer you leave it, and repeat use, a major factor. And that gets me right on the knot. So that's it.
I've got a question. So,
Yes.
you were talking about reuse of
Yes.
barrels, and one of the things that's become more popular in North America is recuperating barrels, as you said at the bottom, reshaping, reusing.
That's right.
Is there a lot of work, or what, to your knowledge, have you tasted those wines, have you had experience?
No, okay, I know they do this. I haven't seen a lot of literature indicating they do shave it off and they can retoast. So in essence, you're getting some of the benefits again, because the longer you leave the wine in, or as the illustration showed, the amount of extract you get on the first refill and second refill is going way down. So you're actually taking out most of what is on the inside of the stave. So if you shave it off, then you're getting rid of that, getting back to more natural wood that still has flavorants, because the wine does not extract very deeply. That's why you can actually shave and reuse. But sadly, I don't have any precise detail.
Nice.
Kind of started answering my question. My question was basically, at what part of fermentation does the extraction of the oak flavor or wood flavor happens?
It continues. Let's see if we go back. This one is showing that it's. Of course, this is not showing the flavor. Let's see. Okay. This one doesn't go terribly long, but you see that the extract is continuing to go up. Now, sadly, we don't have ones that go even longer and longer and longer. It'd be nice to be able to say what is coming out at what time, but people simply haven't done this. Or if they have, I haven't seen that literature. And I do look.
It's a little project for you.
Yeah, that's because I'm personally very much interested into extractions and the alcohol content. Because at one, also in your presentation, you also mentioned it depends on the type of the wine. And
yes.
Because of the alcohol content or the phenolic contents, or is it because of the different type of what sort of wines, white or red? Do you know what would be
The preliminary extractor is okay for anything that's water extractable. Okay, you've got lots of water there, but the alcohol is the one that's going to extract ones that are more lipid soluble. And so, if you have a wine that has a higher alcohol content, then its extraction of lipid type soluble compound will be faster if you have a higher alcohol content. But again, I don't have data that would pinpoint exactly. Yes?
Just to kind of maybe expand on that, when this study is saying lactones, is that like a general class of molecules that looking at something specific?
Oh, there are, it's a particular type of lactone. There's a cis and a trans form of it.
Okay.
So it's a particular compound in two structural forms.
I guess the extension of that is it possible that those increases are actually just reactions happening as well? Like they may be present in the oat, but there's all kinds of examples of lactone being formed.
Oh, yes.
Chemical reactions. So could that be?
It could be. It's hard for me to say. Potential. Yeast also make some oak lactones.
That's nothing. So as I asked before, on your last slide, have there been any studies with regards to the terroir of oak and its impact on the final?
Well, as far as the chemistry, yes. As far as the effect sensorially, I haven't seen anything. So lots of things.
Open up a whole other can of worms.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the chemistries, certainly there is a big difference from where it is, at least in France. And they say that the German Cecilus is milder than the French.
Yeah.
And then you have the same thing from Yugoslavia. You have Russian oak. And differences again.
And of course, obviously, in production process of the barrels that will wipe that out. But you could liken that to
Oh,
the
yeah.
grape wine.
Seguin Moreau is actually doing some of that. So if you want your barrels from Vosges, they actually do, actually on the stave, they actually have a little marker saying where it came from. And I think also what tree it came from. So that if you specify that you want it from this one forest, then they will give it to you. Otherwise, no, it's blended. But if you really want to specify, and they have different levels, they actually do chemical analyses of the oak, that if you want to have a certain specificity of chemical nature, then you can say, well, I want barrels with this sort of character. And they'll actually sample the barrels and say, okay, these ones we guarantee will give you whatever property you have decided you want. Of course, you pay for this, but...
Chihuahua oak as well, that'd be a whole...
just being there, talking to the people, and it was a wonderful experience going through the plan, because when I was going through, the fellow I was with, he was the boss, and everybody's talking on a first name basis. And hi Joe, how are you? This sort of thing. Of course, all French. But anyways, and the workers were coming up and shaking my hand. They didn't know me from Adam. And just the whole, one of the real impressions I got was how friendly everybody was in this factory. And I'm not used to that. I grew up in Oshawa, where you have General Motors and nobody talked to anybody. Here you have all these people being kind of one big family. And they sit down and eat together. My God.
It might be a little off of this presentation, but have you ever seen the difference between the cold climate oaks versus non-cold climate oaks into the flavor?
Sorry, no. I haven't seen that.
Getting into Chihuahua games, though.
Yeah, I would love to find more. But there are many, many things I would like to find, but maybe it occurs in some language that I don't read. Because, okay, French is all right, English all right, but if it's in Polish or something, I'm totally out to lunch. And of course, there is a lot of literature in the native languages that I simply can't access unless I went there and spoke. But
We have one more question.
Yeah, I'm just curious, like it's really off topic actually, I'm realizing the more I'm repeating it in my head how off topic it is, but every time like I hear like a lecture or I read about oak, like I always think about it's ridiculous, but like those big trees that we're cutting for that reason. And I always wonder like who has ownership like of those forests, of those trees, like and how does that work out?
oh, yeah, at least in France.
Yeah.
Okay, in France. It is owned by the government. So they're national forests, and the people who are going to cut have to get a permit, and they have to go in with foresters from the government, and they say, well, you can take this tree, but you can't take that one, and based on size and so on. And the French government now actually plants oak trees. And there was a period around the turn of the 1900s when they had actually stripped the forests. And of course, then they had to get it from Yugoslavia and Germany and Russia and so on. Of course, this is not very high for your self-esteem if you're not having French oak for your French wine. And so the government said, okay, well, we have to stop this. And it's really silviculture. It's not forest in the old days. This is regulated in most of the areas of France.
Well, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to come speak to us today. So as a token of appreciation, we have a card, and then we have a Cork USB for you.
Oh, jolly good. I love Cork.
Cork is his second favorite topic next to oak.
Oh, I love Cork. Hey, I could go on forever on Cork. Oh boy, you get me talking on Cork. Oh God. Now it's impossible to stop me.
So I'd just like to send a thank you out to everyone who attended our lectures this year, both in person and online. We appreciate you tuning into the latest research. And don't worry, if you did miss a video, you can catch them all online. They'll be on YouTube for eternity. So please join us there. And I just wanted to make a brief announcement. Tomorrow we have a guest speaker coming in from Anartis to talk about sparkling wine, especially looking at improving foam capacity and sensory modification at the dosage stage. So hopefully you can join us at 2:30 tomorrow. Thanks and have a great day.